Hey, good to be back with you. Jeff Fuller, Jay Fuller Interviews on Twitter and Instagram. Give that a follow. Also on YouTube, we are now recording Jay Fuller Interviews. Special guest today is Mr. Alex Wolff. And so, Alex, welcome to the show. It's great to have you a part.
Thanks for having me, Jeff. Now, this is a wonderful way to pass the time when we're stuck at home, more or less.
Definitely. Now, I found a couple pictures. This looks straight out of Hoosiers. Could you explain that picture?
Well, that's the closest thing we have to the hoop in a driveway here at the old farmstead where we live in Cornwall. Back in the mid-2000s when we were contemplating launching the Frost Heaves, I wanted to write about it in Sports Illustrated, and they sent a photographer up just to get some stuff for the can. You know, the team was just an idea in our head, my wife and I at the time. But a barn, a basketball, red, white, and blue basketball, because we were in the ABA, seemed like a good way to start. And so that barn is actually just right around the corner from where I'm sitting right now. I'm sitting in an old cow barn right now.
Now let's talk about it. The Vermont Frost Heaves, it brought a lot of joy to Vermonters. It was evidently short-lived, but back-to-back ABA championships. Could you just walk us through what gave you that idea and how fulfilling were those years with the Frost Heaves?
Yeah, it was definitely just a very short window of time, but quality over quantity, I guess would be the way to put it. It was just the beginning of the whole switch over to the web. And there was a lot of talk around the office about content. We want to push out content and find ways to keep people going to SI.com. And I happened to be out reporting a story about Marty Blake, who was the NBA scouting director at the time. And I was visiting with him in his office in Atlanta, and he was bellyaching about the new American Basketball Association, ABA, which did have the red, white, and blue ball. But he was complaining about how many franchises there were and how few were able to finish the season. And he was grumbling and saying that, apparently it takes only a few $1,000s to get a franchise. So all sorts of people who don't have the resources to finish a season would wind up with teams. And I blurted something out in his office about, well, gee, for that, I could start a team and write about it. So I did a little more research, found out that the market rights to Vermont were still available, go figure, and got editors to sign off on it in New York and in the office. And of course, the commissioner of the ABA at the time realized that there'd be some publicity value in having a Sports Illustrated kind of reality series going on during the course of the ramp up to our first season. And then for the length of 3 full seasons and then part of a fourth.
And so talk a little bit about some of the players. I know John Bryant, he was a favorite of mine. But what was it like selecting those players and being a part of an NBA or professional draft?
Well, the great thing about the ABA was there really was no draft. It was kind of the Wild West. You had any player you could persuade to sign as long as they'd be willing to pay for ABA wages, which were pretty thin. And the only decision that I wound up making, I was the president and the GM, and with my wife, the co-founder of the team. But the real decision I made was, okay, we'll find 2 finalists for our head coaching position and put a vote to the fans. And the fans, in their wisdom, town meeting style, chose Cabot's own Will Voigt. And it was Will who ended up doing the scouting and the evaluating. There you go. Good work there, Jeff, getting that photo up. There he is. Cabot's own Will Voigt. And he had this great network of contacts, coaches, and having coached in Norway for a while, he had some great international contacts. He worked in the video room of the Spurs. He was a protege of Popovich's, had actually house sat for Pop and his pets. So we basically set Will loose, and he was able to find guys like John. John played 3 seasons for us, was a rock, and so many other wonderful players, guys who kind of slipped through the cracks. And Will had this offense that really encouraged guys making reads on the fly. So maybe you remember a guard named Aaron Cook.
Yeah.
He was a player that UVM fans knew because he played at Hartford. So he'd come in and out at Patrick Gym a few times. He blossomed for us. A guy named Antonio Burks, a sweet shooting lefty, great range, wonderful personality in the locker room. Antonio had been briefly on Will's team in Norway, so he knew him. And then we had these gems. Will had these tryout camps that he staged around the Northeast. And this guy, Melvin Crudell, was a star of one of those tryout camps. And we got him up, and he was this great energizer bunny off the bench. So it was basically sort of the bad news bears, except guys could play. You know, it was everybody had a strange origin story, but you put them all together, and they were hungry. And we were able to do some things to supplement their meager wages. We cut sponsorship deals, trade deals, so we could get them fed and put them up in discount hotels with free breakfasts, and it all worked out. And having that ABH championship playoff run through that first season and culminating with that great, exciting game against the Texas Tycoons at the Auden Berry was the capstone of it all.
Certainly, and I think Marcus came in just at the tail end, but his tragic death, just being shot a couple years ago in Montpelier. Can you just talk about what it's like for you to be a writer with Sports Illustrated, but also part of so many tragedies? How do you bring these stories to life, but also value what these individuals mean to so many?
Yeah, Marcus played 3 seasons for us too, and he was probably the first signee we had, as I recall. It's been really gratifying to me to see. Before his tragic death, Marcus had really put his roots down in the community. And Marvin Safford, one of our assistant coaches, is still living in Vermont. And I found particularly in Barry, there was a bond between the players and the community that was really special. I don't know if it was the working class thing that the players sensed in the stands. Hey, we're working hard on the court. You guys work hard at your job. We have this in common. The way the Odd was reliably filled with fans and the cowbells, and so much of that I think really energized them. And Burlington was great too, but there's a lot more going on in Burlington. And I think everybody felt that in Barry, we were the thing for those 4 months of the season. And it was no accident that after we won that first title that we had the potluck and the raid in Barry.
Sure. It was a wonderful time, and Alex Wolff joined some long time with Sports Illustrated. Could you just share about some of those moments with Sports Illustrated? And you mentioned a picture frame in the background, The Last Dance just coming out on Sunday. What were some of your memories from being with Sports Illustrated, but right now talking about that Jordan era, The Last Dance?
Yeah, I was really lucky when I joined the magazine in the early 80s. There was a real boom in the economy. There were great numbers of ad pages, which supported a lot of editorial pages. And basketball was just beginning its ESPN-fueled rise. So they needed bodies to throw on the beat, whether it was the pros or the colleges. And I was mostly the college guy. But then in 1984-85, I got tossed on the NBA beat. And sure enough, indeed it was one of my most memorable stories. I got asked early in that season, it was Michael Jordan's rookie year, to go out and find out what all the excitement was about. And I covered Michael a little bit in the colleges when he'd been at Carolina before his sophomore season there in Chapel Hill. I interviewed him. And so I had a little bit of a familiarity with his game, and he knew who I was. And I caught up with the Bulls on a road trip. And it was this cover, which I pulled off the wall for you guys here. I was delighted at the Last Dance. The camera panned across this cover. It was the first President born. It was against that he would take on a little. But you could tell that something really special was brewing. And of course, it was the season after that he had that amazing performance in Boston Garden where he scored 63 points in a playoff game against the Celtics. And I was there for that also. I had swung back to the college beat, but the NBA playoffs, of course, take place after the Final Four, so I was happy to be hooked up with him again. So yeah, those are clearly two of my favorite Michael memories. Were reporting that cover story his rookie year, and then the 63-point monster game in Boston Garden. I actually also came back to do a story on him when he scored his 55 points, his double Nichols game.
Yeah.
Against the Knicks. Exactly. Very good. In Madison Square Garden. And that was after he came back from his retirement. And he had that way at the big stage, knowing that the bright lights were on and it was time to dial it up. And he did. He reliably did. I cannot wait until Sunday night when we can bite off a couple more episodes of The Last Dance.
Oh, me as well. Alex Wolff makes some time. And Alex, when you saw Jordan as a rookie, and then when he was phenomenal, as you mentioned, that second year against the Celtics in the playoffs, did you have any idea we'd be talking about him as the GOAT?
It occurred to me at the time that this guy is something really special. And I was kind of taken aback in The Last Dance last Sunday when a couple people on camera said nobody knew. Trying to make excuses for, I don't want to brag or claim to be a basketball savant because I'm not. But there was something really special. And I remember his junior season at Carolina, they had a game up at Cole Fieldhouse against Maryland, and there were things that he was doing in that game, mostly defensively and up in the air and just getting separation from defenders, that you could see the paradigm shift. You could see how the game was moving away from the big clunky 7-footer, and that if that's what it came down to, the really agile, fast, do everything, versatile player, and Magic was giving us a little foretaste of that. If it was coming down to that, the plotting center was going to be left behind. And so I did have a feeling that this guy was really electric. And when you factored in the Dean Smith Carolina system thing, which meant that the Raps were a little bit on him, you knew that when the NBA came calling, especially a team like the Bulls that had really nothing else going for it, this guy was going to be let loose. And that's what was so much fun about those first two episodes of The Last Dance. You got such a great glimpse of that. And I'm sure we're going to get more of it coming up here on Sunday.
And now, players, switching gears a little bit to another tragedy I just thought with Marcus Austin as well, but Len Bias, you saw some of the highlights of him in college. What type of player do you think he would have been in the NBA?
Well, it's interesting. Len Bias was in that game that I was just referring to where Michael went off at Cole Fieldhouse, which of course only made what Michael did that much more impressive because he didn't do it against chopped liver competition. Bias was just a lovely, particularly offensive player. He was strong. He was kind of built for the NBA. In some ways, Paul Pierce became the guy for the Celtics that Bias might have been years earlier. So if you imagine Paul Pierce's game, but a little less workmanlike, a little more spectacular. He would have been up there finishing off alley-oops and things at the rim. He was the guy that, the Reggie Lewis tragedy, I think a lot of Celtics fans think of that in conjunction with the Len Bias tragedy. And it did kind of put the whole Celtics thing on ice. And actually, the Frost Heaves was happening at that very point just before the Celtics kind of reorganized. So we benefited a little bit from New England basketball fans in Vermont anyway. Really, if they wanted championship basketball, they kind of had us or nothing else. But yeah, Bias was, for a franchise that had so much luck, they ran into a little bit of bad luck there for a stretch. And the human tragedy, of course, not just at Reggie, but a Len Bias too. I think it sent shockwaves and a real chill through the NBA because it was drug related and the league was trying to put some of that behind it.
Alex, could you just talk a little bit about being an author? I was talking with my wife how I think society has regressed because we used to read to our kids, then they'd watch videos, and then they'd learn to read on their own. Now it seems as though a lot of adults like myself, instead of reading a book, I'll listen to a podcast. Or my son, who's just graduating high school, instead of reading, he's actually watching more videos on YouTube. Do you think this is good or bad, or just it is what it is?
Well, one thing, technology is great. And what it's enabling people to do, it's just so exciting. Can you imagine if we didn't have technology? Kids wouldn't be learning right now. So I don't want to brand anything with too broad a brush. And I do think that the delivery of stories, the telling of stories, which is what I've done my whole life, and you do too in your way, with your show. I mean, bringing stories to an audience is just a matter of platform. And I think as human beings, we're kind of programmed to want to hear narrative. I do think it's still really important to read and to be immersed in books at a certain age. And if you can then layer things on, if you have a high school kid who's into videos, I've got a high school senior and a high school junior who are into them too, which is probably sucking up the bandwidth, which is making our talk a little more challenging. But, I like to think that they've been kind of raised to understand stories and, who characters are and the way the plot develops, all that stuff. Whether you're absorbing it through a podcast or through streaming service like Netflix, or you're picking up a book. I mean, obviously I'm biased toward books, but the cover that you have over your shoulder, Jeff, is a book that I realized I needed to tell that story with photos too. So it's a very heavily illustrated book. And a while ago, I gave up that battle with TV and movies and the moving image, and I've been delighted to collaborate a little bit in other medium. I collaborated with a guy, Steve James, who directed Hoop Dreams, once on a short documentary, a 9 or 10 minute documentary short about the Yugoslav national basketball junior team and what it meant to the country before the country collapsed because of the war. And that was just such a great experience of storytelling. And when you have Vlade Divac looking into the camera and talking about what he lost as a result of the war, you can see in the expression on his face what it meant. I could spend ages trying to craft a paragraph in a book or a magazine article that wouldn't come close to capturing that.
So when we look at this book, Audacity of Hoop, Basketball in the Age of Obama, not to get too political, but I do like to bring in things that people don't like to talk about on this show. When we look at the current climate politically, how is this country ever going to be reunited, especially having to following this pandemic?
Well, that's a great question, and you're definitely leaving the 94 feet of a basketball court when you pose it. I do think it starts with everybody feeling they have a shot, they have a fair shot. That was a thing that when you look back at certainly the America that my parents made their way in and into which I was born back in the 50s, the war was behind them. The economy was starting to hum. I think there was an expectation among their generation, my mom and dad's generation, that they were going to have a good life, but that their kids had a chance for an even better life. And I'm not sure that feeling is nearly as widely held today. And that is one of the real prerequisites. I do hope that what we're going through now with the pandemic and the solidarity and people observing stay-at-home orders, and certainly in Vermont, man, I don't think we have a partisan divide in Vermont right now. I think we have an incredibly united state. We have a governor whose approval ratings among Democrats, he's a Republican governor, but his approval rating among Democrats, I think, is higher than it is among Republicans. I mean, yeah. He's working really hard. Everybody's pitching in. We've seen volunteer initiatives just in our little community over here in Addison County that are stirring. And I hope that some of that carries on. Now, to turn the conversation back to sports, I do think there is absolutely a role for sports in knitting us together. And not just for us all returning en masse to a stadium or arena when these stay-at-home orders expire, but the common experience. And moments ago, we were talking about how everybody can find what they want to be entertained by with a very targeted search. And I think one of the reasons we don't have as much unity is that we're not all watching the same thing. We're not having the common experience that we all did when we saw Walter Cronkite on the evening news back in the day. And, we're all in our silos, and we're definitely going through something that is a common experience. Say what you will about it. It's hell to go through, but we are all touched by it. I mean, we know 5 people in our county with the disease.
Wow. And
one that got shipped up to Fletcher Allen to be on a ventilator. Gratefully, he's off it now and seems to be stabilized. But it is something we're all going through. So I just hope that there's a carryover as we go forward.
Certainly. I just wanted to bring this up because it refers to the Olympics, some of the things that you've written in the past. And what type of shocker was that for you to have the Olympics postponed? But how do you think that affects the world, not just the United States?
Well, obviously, your first feelings go toward the athletes who've been training so hard. I think on the second level, it's so many people, largely in Japan, but all over the world, who have an economic stake and a livelihood that's tied in with the Olympics and the Olympic movement, as sponsors or some business. I mean, sports is a huge industry that people depend on for their livelihoods. The Olympics is just one sliver of it, because you've had every major event, leagues suspending their activity. You have these little things like the NFL draft tonight, and the Last Dance is huge numbers of appointment viewing and so forth. But yeah, I think partly people are becoming ESPN classic junkies. They're going out for long walks. That's what we're doing. My wife and I were taking the dog out. We put up our kids' toss backs for lacrosse and things in the backyard early. There's just, you got to amuse yourself somehow. And again, that's why I'm grateful for technology, that you and I can have this conversation and other people can look in on it.
Definitely. Let's back way up. Before you ever were writing for Sports Illustrated or talking about the Vermont Frost Heaves, did you grow up in a sports-minded family? When did you discover you wanted to do something with sports, and what sports did you play?
I grew up in a totally non-sports oriented family, and that's probably why I became really into sports. So my dad was an immigrant from Germany who'd broken his nose 4 times playing field hockey in boarding school, had no athletic aptitude at all. And my mom was a pianist. She was, anything physical was through her fingers and through music. She actually had a little athletic aptitude, but that's not how she expressed it. She did it as a musician. So for me, kind of having this slightly awkward immigrant father and a mother who's into music, I was looking to kind of put my own flag in the ground, and basketball, because it was tied up in the African-American experience, which was very different from my mom and dad were all about. It was a way to hang out with friends. My mother had actually heard from the pediatrician when I was little that basketball was a sport that he approved of because it wasn't a collision sport like football. So she kind of gave her tacit approval when I got into it, and I really did. It was something you could work on by yourself, but then go sort of collaborate with others, when you found a pickup game. So basketball really kind of vaulted to the top. A little bit soccer and tennis and football and baseball, because I grew up in the 60s as a kid, and it was all, it was when TV and sports were kind of married to each other and they both took off. But writing about it, I think, was like that perfect accommodation. I was never going to light the world on fire as a pickup player. I played in high school, but that's pretty much where it ended. But being able to write about it, well, there you go. You pulled up the perfect image. There's a little bit of Walter Mitty stuff going on there with the Frost Heaves. But yeah, writing about it was the perfect thing, because I've always loved words and writing. And in college, I got involved in student journalism and was really lucky to hook on as a fact checker with Sports Illustrated in 1980 when I was right out of college. And that was a blast. So the game's been really good to me, and the Frosties were one, really unforgettable chapter in it.
Oh, for sure. Sure, and I love this picture because while you played in a charity game that I helped organize, and I just think that you're also gracious with your time, and I sincerely appreciate that. But I just look at any kid, how they grow up now. There's plenty of opportunity out there for them as long as they add value instead of just to climb the ladder. But I'll just get you out on this question, and that's for especially these seniors that play a spring sport. What would you tell them that's not as much cliche, but something you've learned from having to endure pain or go through struggle, but has truly made you a better person?
That's a great question. You know, here I am in my early 60s, so it's hard for me to put myself in those shoes. But the one thing about sports is that I think you truly enjoy them and appreciate the value of them when they're part of a broader portfolio. So maybe this is that weird way that fate has of introducing an opportunity to broaden your portfolio.
Yeah.
To put sport in its proper place. And, you know, maybe it means not diving into yet another YouTube video. Maybe it means just going for a walk and contemplating that snowdrop that's just poked up through the litter of leaves from last fall, you know, in the woods behind your house, to give you just a Vermont example. You know, just appreciation for the little things or other people. We've got a couple of wonderful initiatives here in Addison County in response to the pandemic that are about supporting neighbors. We go for walks on our road, and one of our neighbors just started this tradition of painting uplifting messages on stones and leaving them on the roadside where everybody's walking. Yeah. So we're all kind of communicating, but not by hitting send on an email. And will that make you a better lacrosse player or help you shave 1/10 of a second off your sprint time if you're a track athlete like our son was? Maybe not, but what it will do is put sport and the joy of sport that maybe we take for granted, put a whole new frame around it, and we'll better appreciate it. And appreciation is, you know, one of the great human virtues that I think connects us as a civilization.
Oh, for sure. Alex Wolff, thank you so much. We'll have to get you back on. And I just love these conversations. And sincerely, thanks again for making the time and sharing some of your story.
Thank you so much, Jeff. And thanks for the great questions and for sharing all these images, which are kind of a trip down memory lane for me too. Take good care.
Yeah, it's always fun. And I'm going to have some more interviews coming up next week. You can find information on Instagram and Twitter, Facebook. Jay Fuller Interviews is where you can find that information. Also on YouTube. You guys have a great afternoon, and we look forward to sharing more stories with you in the future.